Welcome everybody to the fourth episode of the Scotland Stoics Podcast. Good to be here. Hope everybody's well. I've got a great guest on the day all the way from America called Scott. Scott, how are you today?
I'm perfect in every way, Bob. Thanks for asking.
Thanks for bearing with us. We did have a few technical issues from this side of the pond today. I can only apologise for that. So, Scott, we're going to get underway. We do things a wee bit different in this podcast. We like to get to know our guests before we start talking about one of our favourite subjects, obviously being Stoicism. So, Colin's gladly put up a few questions in front of us that I'm going to ask you. But first and foremost, I see there that you say you're a husband, you're a father, teacher, musician. Like to hear that. I always like to talk to a musician. You're from Floyd, Virginia. Is that right?
Yeah, all right.
Excellent, man. Also here it says transformational specialist, a creative and purpose, and you're also an author of several books which we can all chat about in the next wee while, and we're looking forward to that. So welcome, Scott, and great to see you. I'm going to let Colin start off with the first question for you, and I'll hand over to Colin.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, how you doing? Good to see you. Scott, I know you're a musician. You've got a deep love for American music. I know you're inspired by vintage blues. Can you tell us what sparked that love of music, and how did music shape your early life?
I think I decided to become a musician when I was a really young boy, when we lived outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and when my parents would take us into the city, I would frequently see street performers, and I just thought that had to be the coolest thing ever, to just, sit on a sidewalk with your case open and play music and have people throw the spare change in your case. I didn't really act on that right away. I didn't really start playing proper or start learning proper until I was in college. And what sparked my interest was an album that some friends turned me on to by Taj Mahal called Oh So Good and Blue. And it was, when I heard that album, I just thought, that's exactly what I want to play. And so I took that album down to the music department and started knocking on the doors of all the instructors saying, can you teach me how to play it like this? And after getting the door slammed in my face a bunch of times, I landed at the door of Carl Demo, my very first great guitar teacher, who said, yeah, I can teach you to play like that. And that's how I became corrupted and became a musician.
How old were you then, Scott? You said you're at college?
Yeah, so I was 18, 19, somewhere in there. I had a couple of false attempts as a younger teen, but it never really stuck. So I had a guitar. I just hadn't learned how to play it until I was in college.
Okay, great. So how quickly did you pick it up? Were you a natural, or did it take a good bit of time?
Yeah, so I am the firstborn Leo son, born in the year of the dragon, to a very tough Polak and an even tougher Irish woman. And when I learned my first three tunes, I was pretty sure that I was ready to hit the stage. And so I think sometime after my sixth or seventh lesson, I decided to book myself a show, and I played three songs for an hour. Just kept playing the same three songs over and over again. So. But I've always had that kind of leap first and hope the net appears approach to things, and that's literally how my career started.
Wow, straight on. That's like good going. Very brave as well. Courageous getting on stage after learning just three
I don't know if
songs.
courageous
I'm
is the
playing
right
them
word.
again and again. So what came first? Was it philosophy, or did music come into your life first?
I guess love of music and love of Stoic philosophy came pretty soon, pretty much at the same time. It's just when I was in the seventh grade, I was in a Latin class, and my Latin teacher was a classicist, and he would translate the Greek of Marcus Aurelius into Latin and then give us excerpts to translate into English. And I just loved, reading those excerpts after they were translated. And I would ask him for additional homework. And so after a period of time, he just gave me his copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and I didn't know it was had anything to do with Stoic philosophy. I don't think Marcus ever actually mentions the word Stoicism in the
No.
journal. What resonated with me was that Marcus was speaking to himself in a way that was very similar to the way I was speaking to myself. I mean, just, that voice in your head. And I've always had that kind of like personal development kind of instinct and self-improvement. And so it just really resonated deeply. And I don't think it was until my adulthood that somebody said, "Oh, that's a classic Stoic text." And I was like, "Oh, what the heck is Stoicism?" And then I started investigating and reading Epictetus and Seneca and Musonius Rufus and, anything that was available. And I didn't even know that modern Stoicism was a thing until well after William Irvine's book and, Ryan Holiday's stuff. I'd been reading Marcus Aurelius since 1976. And assuming I was the only person reading this stuff, reading that stuff. So it was great, to discover like, oh, there's all sorts of people reconnecting or connecting with the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy.
Great, good to hear that. Yeah, you make a good point there. I think often when you read these sort of books, there aren't many other people around you that that read them as well. But having these online communities, having modern Stoicism, I think groups like the Stoic Fellowship opens those doors, and you can have conversations like we're having just now about Stoicism and similar things. So I'm going to ask one more question and pass you over to Bob. So you mentioned you also read the other ancient Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus. Which of the three is your favourite, and why?
Marcus is my main man always, maybe because he was the one that I was introduced to first. And I mean, each one of those authors has a very distinct voice. Epictetus is a little dark and a little bit more pointed. Marcus is very contemplative, speaks mostly about justice or the idea of cosmopolitanism and serving others. Seneca seems to be more about kind of like the self-improvement, personal development, and maybe the fact that he had money and I don't, as a musician, meant that it was never meant to resonate with me. But I draw wisdom from all of them. But Marcus has always been my main man, and I read from Meditations daily and have been since I was a kid.
Do you still have that original copy that you got way back?
I wish I did. I read it until there was practically no more ink on the pages, and then we moved around a lot when I was a kid. And at some point, I guess my parents decided that raggedy book didn't need to make the trip, and it got probably tossed in the dustbin. But my hope is that it ended up in Goodwill, and somebody else was able to pick up some wisdom from it.
Great, thanks very much, Scott. Hey, Bob.
Scott, so I'm just looking at this question. It's asking how does Stoicism fit together with creativity? And it's a good question, because when I was just reading the other night, I was thinking I'm kind of more along the Seneca-esque line, where I'm trying to improve daily, but sometimes failing miserably.
Yeah.
But always try and seek to become a better person. I think that's what Stoicism ideals are. Yeah, for me, that's the way I perceive it. But I think that's a great question, because then I'm asked the question that Colin created and asking, how does that fit together with creativity to use Stoicism? Because I'm really interested to hear the answer to that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think my favorite Marcus quote of all time is, "Love the humble art that you have learned and take rest in it." And when he uses the word art, what he really means is the art of living, or at least that's my interpretation of it. But the art of living is the art of creating ourselves. And I mean, that's what life is. We are constantly breaking the current version of ourselves and creating the next version. Whether or not, that's on a path to self-improvement or going in the opposite direction. But that quote to me bakes in everything you really need to live um, a well to have a well-lived life and to find a sense of flourishing and well-being in it. It's because what's baked into that is the craft of living and the act of gratitude, the appreciation for the gift of this journey, of being a human being. Um, and so, Stoicism is built on the premise that virtue is all that's required to live
Yeah.
a good life,
Yeah.
and that living in accord with nature, our human nature, our social nature,
Yeah.
and it, you know, with nature as we usually use it, and extending all the way out to the cosmos. And
Hmm.
it's the reason why Stoicism just if we were to study Stoic physics now, it wouldn't make a lick of sense. But they got the ethics really right, and so human beings are essentially creatures born with a capacity for reason. Doesn't mean that we always act reasonably. It
Yeah.
just means we
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
capacity, and we're inherently social creatures,
Hmm.
and that we cannot survive without each other, and that our duty is to live with and for others. And to me, the creativity is baked into both of those enterprises because in order to live as healthy, happy social creatures,
Yeah.
we have to think creatively. We have to create conversations and communities and collaborations and connections, and these are all creative acts. It's just not arts and crafts. It's not fine art. It's the art of living, but it's still a creative. To me, it's a deeply, profoundly creative enterprise.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I think for myself, the signposting that helps us with that is the cardinal virtues. If you can get as close to adhering to them, you will create that person. You'll never become the ideal sage. You'll never get there, but we always strive to be as close to it as we can. So I think that you answered that question perfect, mate. Thanks a lot for that.
I was thinking a lot of you there, Bob, when Scott was talking. Sometimes rational, sometimes social. That sounds like you, does it not?
Yeah,
Eh?
sometimes, mate, sometimes. Right, so next question I'm going to ask you, right, because we want to find out a wee bit more about you under your journey that you founded Creative and Purpose. Could you tell us what exactly that is and tell us the backdrop as to how it came about, please?
Sure. Um, I've been a musician, a performing musician and teacher all of my adult life. So my career as a performer was 30 years. I just, in the last 3 or 4 years, retired from public performance. I still teach, still maintain a lesson studio. But about 4 years ago, just almost exactly 4 years ago, I was in a period of transition, and I participated in a program called the Alt NBA, which is a program by Seth Godin, who I now work for as a coach in his workshops. And I entered that program knowing that I was ready for something new, but not sure what that would be. And what that program helped me do was realize, reconnect with my love for writing, reconnect with my love for philosophy, and realize that my interest in creativity extended beyond music. Now,
Yep.
I didn't know what it was my new thing was going to be. I just knew I needed a new thing. And I exited that program with two ideas. I wanted to reconnect and really explore Stoicism, and I wanted to really um, investigate and explore what does it mean to be creative in a much broader sense. So I started a site called the Stoic Guitarist, and found out that guitar players have very little interest in Stoicism, and Stoics have very little interest in guitars. So it was very hard to build an audience.
Yeah.
I then um, tr created the Stoic Creative, and I wrote a handbook called the Stoic Creative, which actually continues. I got an email just yesterday, somebody saying they just discovered the book and they loved it and was thanking me for it. Um, but it, again, what I found was, you know, even though you and Colin and I and Patricia and Xavier, who are also here, we all get the joke. We know what Stoicism really means. Still broadly in the world, Stoicism as a word is interpreted only in its common English small s usage, and that so people that were interested in creativity couldn't figure out why do I want to be grimly enduring life as a creative. I'm doing it because it's fun, and then again, creatives, we're not necessarily interested in philosophy. So at some point when I was coaching in one of Seth Godin's programs, I came up with this idea of creative on purpose. And Seth, who has been an inspiration and a mentor of sorts, just shared with me that he thought that was brilliant branding and that I should, that sounded like my thing. And so I just, maybe 2 years into my endeavor, I decided this is the brand, and now all I have to do is figure out what does the brand stand for. And so it's just been this long series of blogging and broadcast. I have had a podcast for 3 or 4 years now,
Yeah.
and finding an audience, and then help with the audience's assistance figuring out what this is, and what Creative on Purpose is really dedicated to is the idea that everyone is entitled to meaningful work. And what we do is we help people discover, develop, and deliver an endeavor, which is defined as something, a way of enhancing your life through work that serves other people. So very stoic in its disposition. We just don't wave the stoic flag incessantly in people's faces. I prefer now to let the stoicism kind of seep in, or
Yeah.
enter through the back door, and it's succeeded because my follow up to the Stoic Creative endeavor was a top seller on Amazon. Didn't overtly refer to Stoicism until the very end, and people were able to approach the ideas on their own terms without somebody banging on about like, you don't understand what Stoicism is.
Nothing. I think I'm just going to ask you a quick question. It's just off topic. So I started reading your book, and what I liked was when you differentiate between creative and artist.
Mhm.
Can you give us just a quick rundown what that is for our listeners? And I found it very interesting. I agree with it 100%.
Oh, great. Yeah, so it was just this idea, my assertion is that we're all creative beings. We're creating
Yeah.
ourselves. You're a baby and you can't speak, and you create yourself into being a talker, a walker, a bicycle rider, and a
Yeah.
sandwich maker. So we're creating all the time. This conversation is an act of creation. The email I drafted right before I hopped on is an act of creation. But there's some things that we decide that we're going to go all in, and we are going to develop craft and refine our idiosyncratic voice within that endeavor. For some people, it's speaking. For some people, it's writing. For some people, it's painting or music or what have you. But we can be amateurs in all sorts of creative endeavors, and that's great. I'm an amateur in most things in life, but when it comes to being a coach, when it comes to being a writer, when it comes to being a musician, I've gone all in, and I am leveling up to artistry, because part of it is art is the work that you do out loud and in public. And art is the work that's not so precious that you hide it from other people. Art is the work that you put in the world so that the right people will connect with it and the wrong people will move on, or spend a lot of time criticizing you because they don't get it, because it's not for them. And artistry is akin to being a professional. A professional doesn't show up because they feel like it. They show up because it's what they do. They don't show up because they're looking for praise. Um, they show up because this is what they do. They don't really care what the naysayers say or the critics say. It's about the craft and about the change that's being made through that creative enterprise that they've decided to level up in.
That's excellent. Thanks, mate. Colin.
You speak so eloquently, Scott. I'm just mumble my way and stutter my way through sentences these days. So you mentioned there you've got the Creative and Purpose podcast, and I know you mentioned you the other day that you put that on hold for the time being, but I was surprised that you've done 200 episodes, about 200 episodes. Can you tell our listeners a wee bit about it? And I'm going to put you in the spot by asking you, who's your all-time favourite guest and why?
So broadcasting the podcast was really a way to help me make sense of what I was trying to do. And so it started off actually as Meet the Modern Stoics, because I was just discovering that there was this thing called modern Stoicism. And I was connecting with the work of William Irvine and Donald Robertson and Massimo Pigliucci and all the known names in that space. And it just so happened that they all accepted an invitation to appear on the podcast, which was phenomenal because it helped me get connected with that movement, and also deepen my understanding and appreciation for Stoic philosophy. And as my idea continued to iterate and transform, the podcast, just like the site, changed names. And as it is now, it's about, most of the time, it's about interviewing people who are successful in some sort of endeavor that seeks to make things better by serving others. And I use those conversations to highlight their tactics, their strategy, their story, in the hopes that people will be inspired to find meaningful work of their own and to find meaning through some sort of enterprise that seeks to make things better with and for the people that are around them, and share tips and insight into how my guest was able to become successful in whatever enterprise that they're interested in. It's interesting that you mentioned that the podcast has been on a hiatus for a few weeks unintentionally. I've just been too busy to book guests. But just today I was listening to David White on, so I had this ritual every day where I go for a run at the cemetery, and I call it my cemetery run. And I was listening to David White, and he mentioned, he used this word threshold, and I was just like, that's a great word, because I really believe in this moment, we're having this conversation during a pandemic, during, in the States, a period of, incredible social unrest, racial injustice, again, being highlighted as a problem that we haven't yet solved. People are trying to figure out, how do they work? How do they live? How do they make a living? In a time when the world has gone upside down and sideways for everybody. And what I have been saying since March is there are silver linings in this moment that we're in. And this idea that we want to go back to the way things were is ludicrous, because what we have is the opportunity to exit a situation far better off than we entered it. It's a threshold. Now, a threshold is a doorway into something new, and it presents a choice. Are you going to cross the threshold, or are you going to stay where you are? And so the next season of the podcast will probably be, rather than inviting other guests, I'll probably be just host on mic, talking about these ideas that I have about how we can, the threshold is here, it's time for us to think about stepping into possibility, the possibility that we can be better, that things could be better, not just for ourselves, but for, the entire globe, because this is a global moment. This is, as a human community, we're all experiencing the same challenge. And if we lean into it together, we have the opportunity to make the world a better place for everyone, instead of what we usually do, which is make it better for the people that already had it pretty good to start with, and the people that didn't have it good to start with continue to get stepped on.
Great, Scott. When are you running for president?
Yeah, I would. I don't think that is what.
You sound
I
like
don't
the
think.
type of guy America needs.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
No, just
so,
America, you'll be all right, Eddie.
yeah, come over here. Come over here. So, who's your all-time guest? I think you
Oh,
tried
that's
to
right.
get away with that one.
I try to
Yeah.
get away for that there, Scott. Come on.
Oh boy. I mean,
Top three,
honestly.
mate. Top three. That's fair.
So my friend and mentor Seth Godin has been on multiple times, and those are always fascinating discussions. I recently spoke to Sean Askinosi of Askinosi Chocolates. That was, I mean, I just really found a simpatico, a compadre in my conversation with him. We just aligned on so many things, and that was really exciting. Other favorites have been all, I loved interviewing all the modern Stoics. Donald Robertson's been on a couple times. I
Yeah.
deeply, invested in sharing his work with others. I think like Roman Emperor is a brilliant book that is doing a lot of good in the world. I've also had Bernadette Jiwa, who's a great writer and kind of expert on story. Uh, I mean, I could just go on and on. Michael Bungay Stanier, who's been on the broadcast, he's a friend and a brilliant, insightful human being. So that's a handful of the ones that leap to mind.
You know that
Thanks
you
very
know
much.
that Colin's free next week if you want a new guest, mate.
I know a guy that could make that happen.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Right, next question, Scott. I'm actually quite intrigued with this one. So it says that you can promise a better living through endeavours. So endeavours to me is hardship, resilience, and so forth. So the question I'm asking you, I mean, I've been through my own experience, Scott. I've been through a lot of addiction issues when I was younger, a lot of gang involvement, stuff that was no nice, small time criminality, not nature. But I had a lot of heartache and pain, and Stoicism helped me massively get through those experiences, especially in the last maybe 5 years. Had something happened to us, and Stoicism helped dramatically. What does a typical day? Well, first and foremost, can you give us an experience in the past when you've had to come up against some real endeavours, and then after that, give us a kind of a rundown, a day-to-day with how Stoicism would help you? Thanks.
So I think of an endeavor as meaningful work that is done with and for other people. And again,
Yeah.
it's you're enhancing your life most through work that serves others. That's what it for me an endeavor is. An endeavor, as you indicated, Bob, is fraught. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be failure, misfortune, and difficulty. What Stoicism teaches is number one, how to be how to pursue that kind of enterprise with intention and integrity, and it teaches that the outcomes of our endeavor are beyond our control. The effort, the quality of the effort is what is the reward. If you happen to achieve your financial goals or your impact goals, that's great, but that's just a preferred outcome. It's not the point. The point is the work itself. And then the other thing that Stoicism does is it provides context. when you zoom all the way out and you look at your piddling and your ranting and raving and thriving and so forth, you are a meaningless, speck amongst a bunch of other meaningless specks on a speck of a planet in a vast cosmos that does not care whether or not you're happy. And at the same time, you're part of a cosmos that of which you are an integral part, that has presented you with the gift that of being happy by accepting where you are while you are striving toward where you want to be. And that kind of measured context, putting yourself in the context of everything, as opposed to just, most of the time I think people like me who are doing things online, we're mostly working alone, and we're mostly living in our head all day long, even if we're connecting with other people and coaching sessions and emails and so forth. So yeah, Stoicism has just been immensely beneficial, not just in navigating the vicissitudes of trying to do meaningful work and make a living at it. It's helped me in all my relationships. It's helped me be a better performer on guitar, a better parent, a better friend, and navigate the challenges of being a human being with a greater sense of equanimity and appreciation. And so it's just, it is central to who I am. It's just something that I share discreetly.
No, thank you. Right, I'm an avid runner, Scott. I run most places. I run a lot across country. I run over mountains as well. I run along the streets. But I've not quite done a cemetery run yet. Can you give us a wee rundown as to what the cemetery run is? Thanks.
Sure. So I was never, I played sports all the way through high school. I played American football, played lacrosse, rugby. But I hated running. So, I mean, I was always the last in the sprints, and I was always at the back of, the long distance running. And after, in my adult life, after I stopped playing collegiate sports, it was like 5 pounds a year, which by the time I was 45, that was a lot of pounds. And one day I just decided I am tired of being fat and I'm going to do something about it. And I literally started by just walking to the top of my driveway and back. And that turned into, a mile of walking and 2 miles of walking, 3 miles of walking. Then I started running portions of it. And eventually I became a runner that competed in 5Ks and, went for a run every single day. And at the time we lived on a farm down a very long dirt road that nobody else ever came down. And it was great. We sold the farm, moved to town, was thrilled to be in town, charted a run that took me from our new home to the cemetery and then back. It turned out to be a 3-mile run. And like the second day of my run, I was going across a crosswalk, which is where people are supposed to stop, and came literally within less than an inch of being hit. I decided that if I didn't want to end up in the cemetery, maybe I should drive to the cemetery and do my run there. And it turns out that 6 laps around the cemetery is 3 miles. And the cemetery sits on the highest point in town. Now, I live in southwestern Virginia in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and from the cemetery I can see all the visible ridges of the Blue Ridge in our county, surrounded by pasture and farmland. There's cows lowing in the distance. There's deers crossing the field. The cemetery itself is just beautifully kept, and of course there are the tombstones reminding me that my time here is finite. And it's just it's a ritual because I use it to remind myself every day that I have limited time left, and if I want to make the biggest difference I can't waste any time. So it's just the run is for my health, mental and physical. The reminder helps me reset, sometime in the late morning, and come back home to get back to doing the work that I feel like I'm meant for.
That's excellent. Really great explanation there as well, Scott. Thank you very much for that. Colin, you're up, mate.
Yeah, this will be the final question before we see if Patricia or Javi have a question for you as well. I'm really tempted to ask you to play as a song, Scott, but I will stick to the. I might still do that.
Yeah.
I see you really want to. I'll stick to the question. So you had a book out earlier this year, a short book. I think it was out July. Stepping into possibility. 3 questions to help embrace uncertainty and navigate adversity. Now, I'm going to ask you 2 of those questions, the last 2 questions. Hopefully you know what those are, but I will ask them. What's next for you, Scott, and what's it for?
Well, so I just completed my next handbook, which is called Onward, and the subtitle is Where Certainty Ends, Possibility Begins. And it's actually, in some ways, an expansion of stepping into possibility, in that it is about embracing uncertainty and navigating adversity. And it's in a way also a follow-up to Endeavor, which was all about this: how do I discover, develop, and deliver the work that I'm meant to do? But the secret that I can share here amongst friends is that it's based on the 3 Stoic disciplines. And so again, Stoicism is not mentioned until the very end, but the 3 Stoic disciplines of Epictetus are the discipline of perception, the discipline of action, and the discipline of will. And sometimes we call the discipline of perception the discipline of desire, and sometimes we call the discipline of will the discipline of assent. But I prefer the Hayes translation just because it makes more sense in terms of the way I'm approaching it in the book. And the way that we embrace uncertainty and navigate adversity is to see things as they really are without all the attached value judgments and emotive reactions, to frame the choices and possibilities, to then decide what is the best choice for now, and to step into that choice, and then to remember that what it really is all about is virtue, development of character, and recognizing that the effort itself is the reward, not the shiny rewards that we might be chasing.
So when's that coming out, Scott, and where can we grab a hold of it?
So I'm releasing it on Thanksgiving Day here in the States, which is in late November. That's the same date that I released Endeavor. This is really, I see it as a kind of a follow-up to Endeavor, and Endeavor was just a distillation or a retelling of the Stoic creative in a more narrative style. So it's actually of the 3, Onward will be the shortest of the handbooks, because and intentionally so. What I'm trying to do is get my message across in as few pages as possible, so that people can actually take the principles and start putting them into use, because I think now more than ever we need to have this posture and mindset of embracing uncertainty and navigating adversity and seeking to make things better with and for the people we find ourselves with.
Great. And will you be picking the ideas, the themes from your book up when you pick up your podcast again? Is that what that's going to be aimed at? Yeah.
Yeah. So the last season of the podcast for this year will be this idea of the threshold and stepping into possibility, and unpacking and sharing readings from Onward, and doing some live events with members of my community at Creative on Purpose. We have about 600 people that have signed up to be a part of that community. Wow. So we'll be doing some events for the community, but doing them out loud and in public, so that other people can get a sense of what we're up to, and hopefully create enough status anxiety or outsider status to get a few more people to come on in and join us, and trying to make make the world a better place.
Lovely stuff. So the book is called Onward, and it's available on Amazon, is that correct?
Yes.
On a pre-order?
Yeah, if you put Scott Perry Onward and Amazon in a Google search, you'll find it.
And what about your podcast? Where can we find that?
I think it's everywhere that you can listen to podcasts, but I only upload it to iTunes, but the internet seems to be sorting it out and letting it be found on other places.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks for answering our questions. We'll open up to the listeners. If you've got a question, can you just unmute yourself and ask, or just put your hand up, raise your hand, and we'll unmute you.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Hi, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Can hear you, Patricia, yeah.
Okay, I'm not very good with the technology and I'm on my mobile phone. I haven't known your work before. I'm very inspired by what I'm hearing. So thank you very much for talking to us. One thing I'm wondering about is, in your books, why don't you mention the philosophy until the end? I ask you this because it seems to me that there are an awful lot of sort of trendy, get quick fixes, how to improve yourself books around. And I don't really like seeing Stoicism in that way. I think it's terribly important to understand that it's not just a life hack, there's an awful lot more behind it. So why don't you say that before the end?
So in the Stoic Creative, I obviously ignored the approach that I'm currently using, and I also ignored Epictetus's provocation, why don't you keep your philosophy to yourself for a little while? So Epictetus would encourage his students to not go out in the world waving and evangelizing Stoicism, in part because I think in my experience bears this out. Stoicism is not a religion, but we do have evangelicals out there, and I don't know what your experience is, Patricia, but like here in the States, we have Jehovah's Witnesses and all sorts of evangelicals, and we tend to not be very friendly to them or interested in inviting them in and having a conversation. And what I found was that waving my Stoic flag seemed to be more of a turn off than a turn on with the people that I was trying to share it with, and that by sharing the principles, and I want to just also say I'm totally with you that one of the things that I dislike when I listen to Tim Ferriss talk about Stoicism as kind of a life hack is like that's not on point. That's not what Stoicism is for.
No.
Stoicism is a beautiful philosophy of life. It is a lived tradition. It is a lived practice, and it's not something that you cherry pick because it will help you lift more weights or drink more wine or whatever Tim is doing with it. I've always been more drawn to the work of Donald Robertson or William Irvine or Christopher Gill, than the work of Ryan Holiday and the others that kind of seem to be more of using the philosophical practices as life hacks as opposed to a rich philosophical tradition that they can weave into the life they're already living and experience a greater sense of purpose and well-being in doing so. And so it's the strategy that I'm using for now. What I've noticed in Endeavor is I sold a lot more books and I changed a lot more lives, and I piqued a lot more interest in Stoicism by saving it for the punchline as opposed to delivering it as part of the setup.
Okay, now I need to read your books and see how you introduce the Stoicism, but I'm glad to hear that. That sounds good. That sounds very sensible to me.
Thank you. And I appreciate your question very much. Very thoughtful. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Patricia. I did joke with Bob last night that we need to change the name of our group from the Scotland Stoics podcast to the Scotland's On Purpose podcast to see if we get some more listeners in. But yeah, you do make a valid point there. As soon as you mention Stoicism, people sort of a lot of people turn away or turn around and walk the other way. But some people do like maintain an interest. I think it's a balancing act, isn't it? And you've got to do the right thing and what works and what helps people. And if you found that way endeavour, then you've done the right thing in continuing that with Onward. And I for one really look forward to picking that up and reading it in November while I'm having my Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah.
Is that haggis in Scotland?
Yeah. Haggis, neeps and tatties.
Vegetarian haggis for me.
Yeah. Oh, good for you. Good on.
Do you want to round us up?
I'd just like to, first and foremost, thank you, Scott, for coming on to the podcast. It's been an excellent conversation today. And just to let the guests know that our next interviewee will be Jonas Salzburg. I feel like Salzgeber, sorry, I'm not even pronouncing the man's name properly. That kind of leads us on to last week. We were just saying a minute ago, he's got a really good book out there called The Little Book of Stoicism. Mm-hmm. And for the listeners, to let them know before he comes on in a couple of weeks' time, it is a great introduction to Stoicism. It's a very simplified version, and it lets the people who maybe are not so great with lengthy words like myself to get into Stoicism. So no, it's a really good read. So I recommend everybody to be reading that before he comes on. And that's us. So thanks again, Scott, for another great episode. Thanks to all the guests who come on, and thanks again, Colin. Good to see you again, mate, and we'll be on again in a couple of weeks' time. So for everybody, thank you. See you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for that, Scott.
Yeah, that was great.
Enjoyed that.
When you when it's live, let me know, and I'll be happy to share with my list and with and I'll share the link on social media to help spread the word.